Thanks for joining me again, Catherine and Tegan. We're going to be continuing to look at Frankenstein and Shelley's use of form, in particular the romantic form, and how she explores the social and political upheaval and conflict in the novel. So we're picking up on page 82. We're looking at how Frankenstein has just returned home because he's heard that William has been murdered. This little paragraph in the middle is what I want to draw your attention to. So the road that ran the side of the lake, which became narrower as I approached my native town, I discovered distinctly the black sides of Jura and the bright summit of Mount Blanc. I wept like a child. Dear mountains, my own beautiful lake, how do you welcome your wanderer? Your summits are cleared, the sky and lake are blue and placid. Okay, so here, this description of his hometown. I said in the last video that Frankenstein has this relationship with nature, and that's represented in his hometown, which is ironic because that is where his duty also is and where his family relationships and domestic sphere is. And yet he rejects that to go to university and to study, and that's where he comes up with his creation, which in the end is what renders his suffering. But he talks about his beloved country and the delight that he has in beholding the streams, thy mountains, and more than all, thy lovely lake. But even though his home scene and nature can offer him some reprieve, when night comes around, he still feels gloomy. And so on page 84, again, we have another storm that approaches where he is, and he describes the tempest of the storm, that metaphorical description there, so beautiful yet terrific. I really wanted to emphasize that oxymoronic description that Shelley incorporates of the storm, really emphasizing how the Romantics believed, in the power of nature, and that it is something of beauty, yet it's also something to be feared because of its power, and because we can't control it as human beings, that idea of it being ethereal almost in a sense. So that's really represented well there in that quote, while I watched the tempest, so beautiful yet terrific. It's a great line to represent that idea, the romantic idea there. Then we go on to talk about how, he feels that the deluge of water and the tempest is a funeral for William, and as he's mourning the loss of his brother in this place where he believes his brother to have died in his hometown, he perceives the gloom of a figure which stole from behind a clump of trees near to me. I stood fixed, gazing intently. I could not be mistaken. A flash of lightning illuminated the object and discovered its shape so plainly to me, its gigantic stature and the deformity of its aspect, more hideous than belongs to humanity, instantly informed me that this was the wretch, the filthy demon to whom I had given life. What did he there? Could he be, and in the parenthesis here is really important, I shuddered at the conception, the murderer of my brother. No sooner did that idea cross my imagination than I became convinced of its truth. My teeth chattered, and I was forced to lean against a tree for support. The figure passed me quickly, and I lost it in the gloom. Nothing in human shape could have destroyed that fair child. He was the murderer. I could not doubt it. Okay, so a couple of really important points in this section of the novel here on page 84. Just as Frankenstein is having his own private grief and mourning process for William, he sees the monster. It's really important that the monster is still described as more hideous than before, belongs to humanity, and that, he's deformed and he's described as a filthy demon. So that emphasizes that subversion of the Promethean myth again. Frankenstein has rejected his creation. He rejects it. Prometheus, bestowed gifts and loved and adored his creation, but Shelley has subverted that here in the way that Frankenstein has rejected his creation. And that again acts as a caution and a warning of the greater conflict that Shelley sees in her world, this conflict of ambition and science and trying to find and discover the deep and dark secrets of how humanity works and uncover those and rework it and become godlike. There's a warning there that she has in following that path of scientific rationalism. And so there's definitely this conflict she represents, this social and political conflict, and she does champion one idea over the other. So that's really important for you to know as well and to be thinking about. Shelley's also making a point here through this relationship between creator and God and the subversion of the Promethean myth, the ignorance of Frankenstein in playing God and the role of science and tampering with the unknown. There's definitely that warning there. Okay, moving on to page 85. Just up here is where I want to... he talks about how, alas, I turned loose into the world, a depraved wretch whose delight was in carnage and misery, had he not murdered my brother. And there was one more line I wanted to... my own spirit let loose from the glaive and had forced to destroy all that was dear to me. There's in this discussion of William's death, there is a focus on horror genre and form here, and so looking at that evil and exploring the evil intent and desires of the monster, which we see later when the monster recounts the story and recounts killing William. We see that even more so, that Shelley delves into the mind of the murderer, and that evil intention. That's all part of the horror genre, and the horror that Frankenstein experiences, Shelley wants us to experience too. Now, what's really important here is that he has admitted twice now in these last 2 pages, Frankenstein, that he knows that the monster, before even speaking with the monster, because he will speak to him and he will find out the truth of the monster, did kill William. Before that even happens, Frankenstein is convinced in his conscience that the monster has in fact been responsible and is the murderer of William. And it's really interesting that Shelley chooses to include this, because Frankenstein could come clean at this point. And he goes back to his family in a moment. We'll see in the following pages after page 85, he goes back to his family, and he could choose to reveal the murderer. He could choose to reveal that he created a monster and that monster in fact killed his brother. But he doesn't. And he doesn't because he fears their response. He fears that he will be blamed. And so again, we see him choosing his ambition and his self-seeking desires over justice, over duty, and over responsibility. And as a result, there is an injustice that happens, and this is the injustice here, that Justine ends up dying. This innocent female who has loved his family and adored his family, even though he knows she's innocent, which we've seen before he even finds out it was Justine, but now he's in this, on this page 89, he is telling Elizabeth she is innocent, and that shall be proved for nothing but let your spirits be cheered by the assurance of her acquittal. So he's positive to Elizabeth that she's going to be acquitted because it wasn't her, because he knows that it was the monster. But, you know, the irony of the father's line that, dearest niece, dry your tears. If she is, as you believe, innocent, rely on the justice of our laws and the activity which I shall prevent the slightest shadow of partiality. The relying on justice there, I think, is so ironic, because Frankenstein is part of this discussion and he knows the truth, and yet he will not come forward. And all the evidence ends up pointing against Justine. And in the end, she is held responsible for William's death. And Frankenstein knows the truth and yet never steps in. And I just think that that's an interesting comparison and irony to make there when we're looking at the way individuals and communities seek justice, because they do seek justice for Justine, but not to the point where Frankenstein's going to admit he's wrong. Okay, we'll leave it there for now and pick it up again soon.